I'm curious as to when and how poetry first piqued your interest and what led you to eventually becoming a poetry therapy practitioner.
If I go back in time for as long as I can remember, I've read or written poems, probably my entire life. I've lived in 3 countries, and while my life has changed in every single way, uh, poetry has always been a stable, sustaining factor.
Mhm.
It's like a railing for me, a place I can hold on to not just better understand myself, but recognize how to get through some very difficult circumstances in life. And we all come across those, and we all need a railing. And that has been, I think, a big source for me. Now, how I got here in 2005, when I was first training to become a poetry therapy practitioner, I attended a Penn World Voices conference in New York. And the topic there was writing and catastrophe.
Mm.
And journalists from all over the world were invited to speak at the conference, and some had been prisoners of war themselves. And others had been, witness to it, some really difficult conditions. Carolyn MK, I recall this because it was such an inspiration for me and really a start of this. She's a journalist from Germany, and she read her own testimony as a witness um, to wars, and trauma in wars. And if I quote her, she said, nobody I have ever met in my assignments in the regions of crises of the world has ever asked me for direct practical help. Uh, but over and over again, people ask me, will you write this down?
Mm.
Will you tell the world what's going on here?
Mhm.
And she went on to say that writing would be, a Rockne's thread out of my own labyrinth of sadness. Um, if you take a moment to think about that,
Yeah.
someone who does that, who thinks of how writing not just both connects for us, but how it can be a source, how we can be a source of helping someone else tell their story. So, of course, for this, it raised a lot of questions for me about connecting my own practice of poetry therapy with the population of refugees who I know experience trauma. Of course, we know there's forced migration there, through persecution and being witness to so many atrocities. Um, this was a group I had also not previously worked with. So when I moved back to Toronto as a poetry therapist in 2007, it was in the midst of a legal and political discourse about Bill C-31.
Mm.
Which would have the decisions and amendments that would change the fate of refugees. Um, and this was back, quite a while back as well. But I just wanted to understand at that time how refugees who encounter these enormous hurdles to arrive safely into Canada are then met with further hurdles in order to remain safe and to become, settle here in Canada. So just having that Carolyn MK's permanent, residency, the testimony in that sense around how the residency of refugees and the process that they go through. I was very, very eager to both understand that, tying into another poet, Caroline Forche, who I really also deeply am inspired by and who talks about witness poetry. Help me understand and ask the question, what is the consequence of untold stories? What really happens to the stories that emerge in the lives of these refugees when they arrive in Canada? And who is telling these stories? Um, I couldn't, but they can.
Yeah.
They are the only ones who are the holders of these stories, and they have the lived experience. So I started, I wanted to do some research around this. And since there was no program here, in 2008, I went back, to York, and there was an interdisciplinary program, and I could make my own program. So that's what I did. I made up my entire master's program, every single course, and did a research study to answer the question of, whether poetry therapy can be a lens through which, we can facilitate and better understand what these stories are. Can this enable um, refugees to tell their own stories and for us to better understand their lived experience, because I am not the person to do that. So that's where I started. I thought about, the witness, um, as becomes a really important role here as witness. And so I applied what's a hermeneutic phenomenological study, which is really a really close reading,
Mm-hmm.
deep reading of the words of refugees. So as they went through the poems, they developed the poems. Um, I would put them together as a collective voice in what became a found poem. So found poems aren't something I write. They are poems and words that are collected. Sometimes they are from newspaper articles, sometimes in this case from the refugees who were sharing their stories. Um, it is one of the most deeply meaningful experiences I've ever had. So over the years, you know, the writers and the poets that I've come across, um, have always come back to this idea of how, uh, being whole and have this sense of returning home. So having your stories related, um, becomes that process where you become whole again. You return to a place that feels like a safe home. It doesn't do anything that you are not. It's simply a recognition that you have the capacity to reconnect with the deepest part of you. And once you return to that place, you can rest in it, in being you. You can love and be in peace and believe that this is who you are.
If you want to hear more stories, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like. To support more youth by youth led projects, visit us at youthspeak.ca, where you can donate and spread youth mental health awareness.
YouthSpeak Charity. Speak, inspire, change.